He arrived home early that night. No warning, no grand explanation, just one of those infrequent moments where something deep within you tells you to be somewhere else. The house was as lovely as always, shined floors, muted lighting, the soft thrum of wealth encasing everything. But there was something off, too quiet, too empty. A man such as Samuel Whitaker, with all his triumph and steel-gray assurance, wasn't accustomed to paying attention to the silence. He'd constructed an empire stone by stone, purchased a mansion with every amenity a human could possibly want, and stocked it with the finest of everything, warmth being the one thing. Years before, following the sudden death of his wife, Samuel had taken in a small girl named Ava from the foster system. It was heroic then, something that could cure the emptiness of his life. She was 8 years old, small, observant, a reserved child who did not need much. He provided her with anything money could afford: designer clothes, a princess bedroom, gourmet food. But what he never provided was himself. And then that night, on which he least expected it, he strode into his high-tech kitchen and saw something that brought him to a standstill. No tears, no mess, just a little girl on the floor with a spoon and a bowl of dog food, quietly eating, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. In that one moment, Samuel knew something no parent ever wants to confess. He hadn't made a home. He had constructed a building, a beautiful, costly one, but it did not have the one element that was most important: love. How does a child grow up thinking she's a burden for requiring dinner? How does a man who has everything overlook the most important thing in life, standing right in front of him? And when life grants you a second chance at something so sacred, what do you do with it? All. This is more than a tale of riches or fatherhood. It's learning the difference between giving and showing up. It's about subtle turning points, the ones that aren't accompanied by big speeches or music, but in gentle moments, between a parent and child, learning to view each other. It's a question that poses to us: can we ever really love someone if we've never learned to be present with them? And what does it take to mend the connection we never knew we were severing? Samuel's life isn't remarkable due to what he had, all, but due to what he almost lost and how he decided to struggle for. It is a lesson to all of us. The chandeliers don't count. The square footage, the savings account, the vacations, they don't compare to being the one who remains when it matters. Because at the end of the day, the most significant thing a child will ever recall is who noticed them when they felt invisible. So today, I am going to tell you the story of a man, a daughter, and a moment that could have shattered them, but instead became the start of something stronger, something real, something called home. Samuel Whitaker wasn't just any man. You could say he was the kind of person people either envied or admired from afar. The kind of man whose success came not from inheritance, but from sheer grit, long nights, and risky decisions that somehow always paid off. He constructed his wealth brick by brick, with one tiny rental house in his 20s and expanding it into a vast real estate empire that spanned several states. Stocks, investments, luxury automobiles. There was nothing he couldn't afford, and little he hadn't accomplished. His house was a magazine spread, a mansion that sat on the shore of a peaceful lake, complete with private dock, a full wine cellar, marble floors that shone like ice, and yes, even a grand fountain in the circular driveway that shot 3 stories high. But for all its beauty, the house was strangely quiet, too still. The silence that doesn't calm you, it disturbs you, because beneath all the glamour, there was a void that no amount of money could replace. You understand, Samuel had been married before, had been a good husband, in his own right. But when he lost his wife so suddenly to sickness, something inside him died. The isolation crept up quickly, and after a year of mourning and solitude, and drowning in work, Samuel made a choice that shocked even himself. He adopted a little girl named Ava from the foster system. She was just 8 years old, small for her age. She had soft, curly hair that was always neatly tied back, and her big brown eyes looked like they told stories no child should have to tell. She was polite, quiet, and watched everything. Samuel caught a glimpse of her and thought, this is how I make my life make sense again. He really felt like adopting her marked the beginning of healing for both of them. He was trying to do a good thing. Really, he was. But fine intentions are not always sufficient. Samuel didn't know how to be a father, particularly not to a child who had already discovered the world was heartless. So he did what he did best. He supplied. He stocked her closet with lovely clothes, her room with toys and books, and paid for the best tutors money could obtain. Her bedroom resembled a princess suite, chandelier, velvet drapes, even a bespoke dollhouse. Everything from the outside that a child could ever wish for was Ava's. But inside, she was famished, not for food but for attachment. Samuel did not realize it, not at first. He thought love equated to receipts. When she needed comfort, he purchased a tablet. When she required attention, he instructed her to play upstairs and placed a snack on the counter. He figured she was fine. Quiet children are easy to overlook after all. They don't scream or throw fits. They just fade into the background. And Samuel, mired in meetings, phone calls and business dinners, kept reassuring himself that she was adapting just fine. He even went so far as to hire a housekeeper to keep an eye on her during the day, believing that was sufficient. He didn't see the drawings she never shared with him, or notice how her smile dropped every time he dismissed her. He overlooked the signals, the quiet ones, such as how she began to take her meals by herself, even when he was present, how she never knocked on the door of his office, not even when she dreamed. He thought she was shy, self-reliant, but really she was discovering something that was perilous, that love was bounded, that in that grand lovely house, she could still be utterly isolated. And then came that one Tuesday, the night that would shatter everything wide apart. Samuel arrived home a little earlier than normal. His meeting had been canceled at the last minute, and the housekeeper was already off the clock. The house was strangely quiet. No clinking of dishes, no music playing in the background, not even Duke, the family's large lazy German shepherd, barking. Nothing but silence. As he entered the house, he could sense something was wrong. He relaxed his tie, placed his briefcase against the door, and headed towards the kitchen, hoping that perhaps Ava had turned in early. But when he rounded the corner, he froze. There on the floor, slumped over in her giant hoodie, back against the cabinet, was Ava, her tiny hands grasping a spoon. Before her, an open can of Duke's dog food, the good kind, imported and pricey, but still, dog food. She was consuming it, slowly, gently, as if she did not want to be discovered. His breath halted in his throat. He could not speak, could not move. The briefcase was dropped by him and landed on the floor with a heavy thud. Ava froze, shocked. Her eyes widened, lips parted, stuck in terror. And then, she said something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Something so raw and honest, it broke through all the marble, glass, and steel he had built around his heart. "I didn't think you'd care," she whispered. "Nobody else ever did." That's when Samuel Whitaker, a man who had it all, came to understand how much he'd failed the one person for whom he'd let everyone down. It was Tuesday. Any normal day, or so Samuel believed. His final appointment of the day was canceled, so he opted to return home early, something of a rarity for a man whose schedule was filled weeks ahead of time. Perhaps he could get a jump on papers, or finally open that bottle of wine someone gave him for Christmas. As he drove down the long driveway, the house sat silently, golden in the gentle light of early evening. No lights were lit. The fountain bubbled softly in the distance. It was still, too still. Normally the housekeeper would be in the kitchen, humming some old familiar tune while she made dinner. Ava would be in the den reading, or on her tablet in her room. Their family dog Duke would usually rush up to meet him, but on this night, nothing. Silence. Samuel entered, untied his tie, and shouted out a friendly, "No response." His own voice rebounded back at him from the door. He figured the housekeeper had quit early. Perhaps Ava had retired, although it wasn't even 6 yet. He strode down the marble corridor, his shiny shoes clicking on the floor. He walked past the imposing staircase, then the dining room, and then halted. A faint, ethereal sound issued from the kitchen direction, a soft metallic clinking, as if spoon against bowl. Intrigued, he turned and trailed it, his steps slow and cautious. He turned the corner and stopped dead. There in the middle of his immaculate designer kitchen, hunched on the floor against the cabinet, was Ava, on one of her big hoodies, the sleeves dripping over her hands, her back curled, her head bent low. She sat, surrounded by empty food bags and crumpled wrappers, before Duke's food bowl. On the table next to her was a can of the gourmet pet chow Samuel had bought in bulk, food that cost more per serving than most folks ate for lunch.
Ava held a spoon, and she was shoveling it into her mouth. His initial response was puzzlement. His second was incredulity. His heart constricted. His brain whirled. Was this a joke? Was she kidding? Was she attempting to feed Duke and being goofy? But Duke was not around, and the manner in which she held the spoon, the cautious manner in which she scooped and chewed, told him that this was no joke. She was hungry, and this was what she'd resorted to. He felt as if the wind had been knocked out of him. He didn't budge, couldn't. His briefcase slipped from his fingers and crashed against the tile. Ava jerked, startled, then slowly rotated her head. Her large brown eyes locked with his. No tears, no theatrics, just quiet fear, as if she'd been caught doing something she knew she shouldn't be doing, even though it was out of necessity. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she voiced words. Her tone was even, unemotional, almost too even. I didn't want to disturb anyone, she whispered. I was hungry. I figured this was preferable to asking. The words struck Samuel like a blow. He was staring at her, not sure if he'd even heard her correctly. He opened his lips to say something, but nothing came out, because in that one instant, he saw everything he'd been missing. She hadn't been doing it for effect. She hadn't been acting. She truly felt, down in her little, developing heart, that begging for food, begging to be noticed, begging to be heard, was a burden. And worse, that nobody would ever arrive, even if she begged. It wasn't only about the food. It was about what it meant, that she didn't feel safe enough, loved enough, visible enough to go to the one adult in the house and simply say, I'm hungry. She chose dog food because to her, it was easier than rejection, easier than hearing silence. Samuel's mind reeled with guilt. He recalled the moments that he had dismissed her, said he was occupied, brushed her aside during calls. The subdued dinners where he sat in front of her, but never really looked at her. The moments she had lingered outside his office door, only to turn back without knocking. He recalled the instances that he had felt good about himself for giving her everything she could possibly need, at least, physically. But now, looking at her in this way, on the floor, from a dog bowl, it was as if the blindfold had finally been removed. She wasn't being theatrical. She was making do in the only way she could, and he'd let it happen in his own home. The house around him, the rich cabinetry, the gleaming silver, the imported tile, seemed suddenly cold, unnecessary. What was the use of having a house that was full of everything, if those people who were in it felt they had nothing? He knelt slowly down beside her, not knowing what to say, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Ava regarded him with still eyes, not angry, not frightened, just waiting. And in that moment, in that delicate silence between them, something moved within Samuel. It wasn't an epic moment, not the sort of thing people place in films, but it was real, unadulterated, undeniably human. A man who believed he had done everything right, finally realized how wrong he'd done it. And in that instant, he made a quiet promise. Things would never be the same again. He would no longer hide behind wealth. Things would never be the same again. He would no longer hide behind wealth and work. He would be present, not with grand gestures or presence, but with attention, with time, with attention, with time, with love that could be sensed and not just shown. Because when your child turns to silence, instead of seeking help, that isn't their weakness, that's yours. And Samuel Whitaker, all his worldly wisdom and business acumen notwithstanding, had only just discovered the greatest lesson of his life, learned not in a boardroom, but on the kitchen floor, by a girl who merely wished to be noticed. Something changed in the Whitaker home that night. Merely wished to be noticed. Something changed in the Whitaker home that night. Walls that had been lined with silence were ringing with something else, something genuine. For the first time in months, perhaps even since Ava's arrival, Samuel sat at the kitchen table with his daughter. No distractions, no phone clutched in his hand, no email waiting on the other side of a laptop's glowing screen. Just then, a man attempting to repair an error.
A man attempting to repair an error, and a small girl attempting to trust it would be safe to open her heart once more. Samuel stood silently at the stove, warming up a can of soup, chicken noodle, nothing fancy but warm and comfortable. He filled 2 bowls, put them down, and sat across. They ate in silence. It wasn't about the food, it was about being there. about finally deciding to choose presence over productivity. Ava did not speak at first. She stoked the soup with her glancing up at him occasionally, her eyes scanning his face, as if attempting to determine whether this incarnation of him would endure longer than one night. Samuel for once did not hurry her. He did not populate the space with inane small talk or mundane business anecdote. He waited, and sometimes she began to speak. First just tiny things, how her art teacher had awarded her a gold star, how Duke had ruined yet another of her socks. But then, gradually, the language of her sentence changed. The walls began to fall, one word at a time. She spoke to him about school, about how difficult it was to be in a class of children who knew what it was like to be hugged in the who had someone shouting in the front row at spellings, clapping, waving when they won a prize, or when they did not. She spoke of the embarrassment of having to tell teacher her last name wasn't her dad's yet, and yes, she was adopted, and yes, she was fine. She explained that she would often fake being ill just to go to function, because seeing the other children sprint to their moms and dads the day made her feel like she belonged. And then, her voice was shaking just a bit as she statement cut through Samuel more deeply imagined. I stopped asking for help, because every time I did, someone left. She wasn't referring to the dog. She was referring to every war they'd then didn't. Each social work foster home, each far off who came and disappeared. She had learned in her brief life that it was unsafe to be needy, that requiring love made you get hurt, that to ask was to risk disappointment, and she remained silent, even when she was hungry, even when she was afraid, even when she was alone and in agony. She glanced through the spacious kitchen, granite island, pendant lighting, shiny appliances, and said, "It's nice here, but at times I feel like the house was constructed for everyone except me." That sentence struck Samuel with the force of a blow to the chest. He had invested so much time, effort, and dollars ensuring that she possessed everything he believed a child should have. Toys, tutors, clothes, gadgets, but none of it had taken the place where love and attention might have dwelled. He had provided her with structure, but not with safety, comfort, but not connection. And in the process, he had inadvertently taught her that she was alone, even when she was not. Seated there facing her, Samuel was ashamed, not the kind that vanishes after a night's rest, but the kind that hangs around, the kind that shakes you awake at dawn and demands, "How did I miss that?" Each sentence Ava uttered was akin to holding up a mirror to his soul, and what he saw didn't do him any justice. He had told himself he was a good dad because he wasn't absent like other men. He paid the bills, kept the lights on, provided a roof over her head, and the finest education that money could afford. But all of that didn't count if she didn't feel loved, if she didn't feel seen. The reality was bitter. He hadn't adopted her so that she could have an improved life. He'd adopted her to mend the silent in his own. He believed that by bringing a child into his house, he would somehow repair his loss, fill the emptiness created by the death of his wife, reduce the loneliness that assailed him like a specter. But kids aren't therapy. They're not here to fill us. They're here to be filled, to be poured into, to be defended, and loved with every fiber of one's being, and he'd missed that wholeheartedly. As Ava went on, Samuel put out his hand and grasped her tiny one. It was the first time he'd done so without overthinking, without second-guessing himself. It was instinctual, human, and in that instant, Ava didn't. She gazed up at him, warily, perhaps, but with a spark of something he hadn't witnessed in quite a while, possibly ever. Trust. She didn't say much after that. The rest of the soup went cold, but it didn't matter, because something else was heating in that kitchen, something delicate but true. Samuel sat there, grasping her hand, and allowed the full weight of her words to penetrate. He had provided her with a mansion, true, but he hadn't provided her with a home. He had provided her with a private school, but not tranquility, a soft bed, but no rest. And the hurtful thing, he hadn't done it out of cruelty. He'd simply not known better. But now he did. And that simple, undeniable truth, it didn't just hurt, it broke him. Not in a way that destroyed him, but in a way that demanded change. The kind of break that comes right before something stronger is built in place. The following morning, well before the sun rose completely over the lake beyond his house, Samuel Whitaker did something he hadn't done in years, something so foreign. His assistant called 3 times to confirm that he hadn't done it by accident. He cleared his schedule, wrote it all out. Meetings, calls, a quarterly investor briefing. It all got cleared. For the first time since his empire started, nothing was more significant than a little girl named Ava. He entered the kitchen, where she sat silently at the table, her backpack beside her, waiting for the usual, a quiet farewell, and the driver arriving in the roundabout. But instead, Samuel smiled warmly and said, "Let's go. I'm taking you to school today." Her eyes grew wide. She was surprised, but she didn't know. She just nodded and trailed him to the car, where she sat next to him rather than in the back seat. He asked about her night, if she had any tests coming up, what book she was reading in class. She answered in short sentences at first, still guarded, but something about seeing him there, really there, started to chip away at the wall. At a red light, she glanced at the brown paper lunch bag in her lap and noticed a note tucked under the sandwich wrap. In Samuel's handwriting, just 7 simple words, "I'm proud of you, always will be." She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. The manner in which she gripped that note all the way to school spoke volumes. That night, instead of a catered meal or something lingering on the stove, Samuel rolled up his sleeves and into the kitchen with her. They cooked pasta, tacky, cheesy, overcooked pasta, and wonky garlic bread that was more toast with attitude than anything from a recipe book. When the tomato sauce scalded and splattered on the counter, they laughed, actually laughed, together. No tension, no phones, no half-hearted looks over a computer, just a dad and his daughter in a kitchen that for the first time felt alive. He spent the evening doing something he hadn't done since she entered his life. He sat on the bedside with a book in his hand and asked, "May I read to you tonight?" Ava stared at him, surprised once more, then nodded the tiniest bit. He opened Charlotte's Web and started. His voice was somewhat rusty, his rhythm a little slow. By the second chapter, she was already asleep, her small hand lying lightly on the blanket, her breathing soft and even. He lingered. He didn't dash out. He didn't check email from the hallway. He sat in the dim light there, observing her sleep, and felt something quiet and deep stir within him, peace. In the days that ensued, Samuel emerged as a man rediscovering fatherhood. He questioned her, not merely courteous ones, but thoughtful ones. He heard, truly heard. He discovered her favorite color wasn't pink like he'd supposed. It was navy blue, because it looks like the sky right before it goes completely dark. He discovered her favorite food wasn't pizza, it was oatmeal with honey, the way her foster mom used to make when things felt safe. He saw the way she hummed while brushing her teeth, the way she folded and sorted socks by color, the way she always goodnighted Duke before bed but not him. Until today, she began to draw again, crafting small doodles in notebooks that she left quietly on the fridge for him to discover. She laughed when he feigned hatred of her favorite cartoon, and rolled her eyes when he attempted to braid her hair, and almost knotted it. But she allowed him to attempt the task nonetheless. Gradually, their habits became rituals: orange juice and soothing music breakfasts, evening strolls around the neighborhood, a bedtime tale that on occasion became a 2-chapter epic, because neither of them ever wanted the night to come to a close. And in all those quiet, unglamorous moments, something genuinely amazing occurred. Ava started to shine, not in some mystical way but in that soft manner kids do when they are safe, noticed and loved. She smiled more, laughed harder, even sang when brushing her teeth, dancing around the bathroom, holding a toothbrush microphone. Samuel could see that her shoulders weren't tense anymore, her eyes no longer guarded. The burden she'd borne, years of not knowing, of fear and rejection, seemed to fall away bit by bit to be replaced with something warmer, trust. One night, after a long day of doing errands and having burnt pancakes for supper, she snuggled up against him on the couch, her head on his shoulder. They weren't speaking, just sitting quietly and watching the fire dance in the hearth. And in that quiet, almost holy silence, Ava breathed something that moved him to tears before he even knew what was occurring. Only 7 words left, soft as a zephyr. "Thank you for seeing me now." Samuel didn't reply immediately. He couldn't. His throat constricted, and his eyes stung as he hugged her close and laid his lips on the crown of her head, because he understood what those words signified. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was starting to think she was supposed to be there, that she was not a visitor in his universe, but his daughter, not born of him perhaps, but of something more profound.
And for a man who once believed success equaled profit margins and market shares, this time was the best return he had ever made. The turning point had not arrived with an over-the-top moment or a sweeping gesture. It had arrived in spoonfuls of soup, scrawled notes on lunches, and bedtime tales, in being there, time and time again, even when it was awkward or uncomfortable, in understanding that love isn't loud, it's consistent. And as the flames crackled softly to one side of them, Samuel shut his eyes and enveloped Ava in his arms, silently vowing to her that no matter what the future held, he would never cease to see her. Years went by as they inevitably do, not in great strides but in soft, patient moments that gradually sew a life together. Ava developed not merely in stature, although she came to nearly reach Samuel's shoulder in height, but in confidence, in laughter, in the light which came back into her eyes. The little girl who had cowered on the floor to eat dog food because she was afraid had developed into a young woman with imagination and inner strength. The mansion walls, previously cold and empty, came to change. Her art gradually filled them, sketches, paintings, small school projects Samuel liked to frame like they were for a gallery, and to him they were, every one a work of her soul making itself heard. The house was no longer a showroom, it was lived in, it was warm, it was whole, it was whole. Samuel, too, shifted not all at once, but in ways that counted. He never missed another parent-teacher conference. He started showing up not just for the big moments, but for the little ones, the science fair, the school play, the Tuesday night spelling test. He learned how to braid her hair, well, sort of, how to bake banana bread with a few burnt loaves along the way, and how to listen without trying to fix everything. He learned to say, "I'm proud of you," without needing a reason. And he learned that true love needn't be loud to be strong, it simply must be there. Ava seriously picked up painting in high school, staying late many nights in her small studio by the window, brush in hand, soothing music playing while Samuel sat alongside her working with a cup of tea and a quiet smile. He never got her color sense or abstract concepts, but he never failed to applaud the bravery it took to make them known. He began to bring her insights into his world, to paint the living room, what color, which charity to give to during that quarter, what tie didn't resemble an old man so much for his awards night. Gradually but certainly, they weren't so much a man and a girl attempting to mend, as they were a family. By the time graduation, the day was nearly unreal. Samuel sat in the front row, blinking furiously as Ava walked across in her gown and cap, her smile shining brightly throughout the auditorium. When she received her diploma, he rose and applauded more loudly than anyone else, not minding if it was undignified. His heart was filled to bursting, filled so full it hurt. He remembered everything then, the night she allowed him to read to her. The night they were caught in the rain walking Duke and splashed through puddles instead of running inside. The night she received her first B and wept, and he just hugged her, saying grades didn't matter when it came to who she was. And of course, he recalled the evening he returned home and found her huddled on the floor, a spoon clutched in her hand, forswearing trust and speaking silently. That evening could have shattered her for good, could have toughened her in ways no child should ever be, but it instead marked the start of something greater. It woke him up, forced him to face the reality he'd been too arrogant or lost to perceive, and it provided them both with a gift. Not all people receive a second chance. Each time he walked into that kitchen now, years later, he recalled it, not in shame but in thankfulness, because without that instant, without that difficult, hurtful wake-up call, he might never have really seen her, might never have gained an understanding of what it's like to love,
Might never have gained an understanding of what it's like to love someone not with material, but with time and care and reliability. Ava wasn't simply his daughter on paper. She was his daughter in every tale that they shared, in every joke that was an inside joke, every bedtime story and charred meal. She was his daughter through love. And isn't that the only kind that truly exists? Samuel no longer defined success in terms of bank accounts or business transactions. He took the measurement in terms of laughter ringing through the halls, the music of Ava's favorite playlist emanating from her room, the way she still embraced him at the door whenever she returned home from college. Their house was not perfect, but it was authentic, real, full. And that, more than any trophy or title, was his biggest achievement. They had found their rhythm, their connection, their home, not through riches, but because they agreed to each other, day in and day out. And in that pure, unbreakable choice, they forged something more resilient than legacy or bloodline. They forged home. At times, we learn as we grow up that giving is all about how much we can afford to spend, how large the act is, or how spectacular it appears from outside. We get love confused with luxury, presence with presence. But in reality, the deepest form of love, the kind that leaves a profound impact, is usually quiet, simple, and not visible to the world. It's in the small things, appearing when you don't have to, sitting beside someone in silence when they're hurting, listening rather than hurrying to answer. Samuel Whitaker had devoted most of his existence pursuing success by the number. Business growth, profit margins, material security, and as much as money is fine, he ultimately realized what so many of us know too late. The size of your house doesn't matter if the souls within don't feel secure or seen or loved. Ava didn't require chandeliers or haute cuisine. She didn't require the newest fashions or the finest private educator. What she required, what all children really require, was easy to be valued, heard, held. She needed someone to remember how she liked her toast, to ask how her day went and mean it, to sit beside her when she was too afraid to ask for help. A handwritten note in a lunchbox meant more to her than any designer toy. A burnt dinner shared in laughter built more trust than all the high-tech gadgets combined. And the most amazing part is Samuel didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to try, to stay, to keep showing up. Because kids don't recall the chandeliers or the dimensions of the living room. They recall who attended their school play, who sat on the bedside at night, who gazed at them not as a responsibility or an obligation, but as a gift. Samuel learned that lesson the hard way, but he learned it in time. He took a moment that could have shattered his daughter and used it to shatter himself open instead, to remake the way he loved, the way he lived, the way he viewed the world. And in doing so, he gave both of them a second chance, not just at connection, but at real, lasting family. His tale reminds all of us that wealth is not necessary in order to make someone rich in love. All we need is presence, patience, and willingness to speak over and over. You matter. I see you. I'm here. And sometimes this is the most generous thing a person can offer.